Okay guys, so what I'm going to go through is a very quick video on something called Gaussian Elimination or row reduced echelon form. This is a way to do a system of equations using elimination, but more of an algorithm where you just sort of like repeat a pattern and try to make things look a specific way, and it gets you your answer. So I'm not going to go into crazy detail on why the matrice works and where all these things come from. This video is purely to show you how to do it, assuming you know a little bit about matrices or even the setup. So let's just go through this very basic step by step and with a few notes to go with it. Okay, so basically when you have a system, it could be 2 by 2, 3 by 3, 4 by 4. You're going to take your system of equations and you're going to copy the coefficients into a matrix. Now what you're looking for inside of your matrix, or what I like to do, is I like to put the x's down the first column. So for this one, the top one is a 2, the next one is a 1, and then the next one doesn't have an x, so you need to fill in a 0. Then in my second column, I fill in my y's. So let's look for, there's no y here. In the second equation, the y is a -3 and then a 5. And then do the same thing for z, 1, 1, -1. And after that, you can't just stop right there. You actually, what I do is I draw like a straight line here to separate my equations from my answers, and then I just write my answers over here. Okay, so this is your initial setup. Now, you may already know this from class, I'm not real sure, but the goal, everybody, is to take this matrix and to make this part look like what's called the identity matrix. And the identity matrix just looks like this. And you'll have a number here, a number here, and a number here, okay? So these could be any numbers, and what's pretty cool about this is if you can get these 9 numbers turned into these 9 numbers, then whatever is over here, these are your answers. And I know that the top number is going to be my x because that was the first thing I listed here. The second number is going to be my y because it was the second column, and the third number here is going to be my z because that's how I listed, the third thing. So that is the goal. Now, how do you make this happen? There's really only, you have a lot of flexibility. There's only 2 big rules that I used to stress with my classes. The first rule is if you want to create a 0, if your goal is to create a 0 in a spot, you're going to need to use addition or subtraction to do that. And my other rule was if you want to create a 1 in a spot, you're going to use multiplication or division only. Okay, so I hope you can read my writing, sorry. So that is the 2 rules that you're going to use. Now the first thing that I do is I just kind of analyze the green one, and I analyze where I'm headed. And I don't even know if you guys see it or not, but you can rearrange the rows any way that you want. And for me, like, see how this is already a 1 and that's already a 0? Well, part of me is really tempted just to shift those to the top 2, and then just to move row 3 down to the bottom. So I'm not doing any math here. My first step is like I said, I just kind of like to put them in an order that I like. So since there's a 1 here and then there's a 1 here, I'm just going to recopy this entire row up here, and I'm not doing any math, I'm just rearranging. Then I'm going to take row 3 and it's now going to become row 2. And then I'm going to take row 1 and move it down to the bottom. So I've just rearranged to make it friendlier for me. If you want to leave it like this, you can. There's no rule that says you have to do what I'm doing. This was just me making it a little better for me. Now the reason this is better for me is because the process when you do these is that it's always best to start in the upper left with that number right there, and your goal would be turn this into a 1, because remember I'm trying to make it look like this, then to work down in your pattern, okay? So the goal would be try to get this a 1, then try to get this a 0, then try to get this a 0. Now this is not a 0 yet, right? Like I need this to be a 0. So that needs to be, this is actually going to be the first math problem that I need to do. Once I turn this into a 0, then I'm going to pop up here and try to make this one a 0. Okay, so let's first try to make this a 0. Now look at my rule. It says to create a 0, I'm going to use addition or subtraction. Okay, well if I look above, if I were to add this to this, it would still be a 2, right? 2 plus 0 is 2, so that doesn't help. What if I add it to the first row? 2 plus 1, well that's a 3. So you've got to play with these a little bit and imagine that you're doing normal elimination. Now the only way to turn a 2 into a 0 is to either subtract 2 or to add a negative 2. So what I'm going to do is in the background, okay, and you can write this out to the side or whatever you want to do, but in my head or in the background, I'm going to take row 3, I'm going to call that R3, I'm going to take row 3, and I need to add that to row 1, but I can't just add it to a normal row 1 because it won't cancel this out. But to cancel that negative 2, what if I multiplied row 1 by negative 2? If I take this and add it to this one multiplied by negative 2, then things should be awesome. Okay, so this is my work I'm doing out to the side. So I'm just gonna actually do it. Here's row 3, okay, and I'm gonna add that to negative 2 times row 1. So what's negative 2 times this one? Negative 2 times that one, 6. Negative 2 here, negative 2 here, okay? So I'm going to do this math kind of either in my head or out to the side, get my answers. What is that? Negative 1, okay. Now, once I get this answer, it's like, well, what do I do with this answer? Well, the goal was to replace this, right? So if I'm trying to replace this with a 0, it looks like that's going to do the trick, but I need to replace the entire row with this. So my next matrix is going to look like, I'm going to recopy what I had for row 1. I'm going to recopy what I had for row 2. And now for row 3, I'm replacing it with the answer I got when I did my little side math over there. Okay? So that is how this works. What you would see probably in a class, you might see a professor not show you any of this, or a teacher. You might just see a teacher say row 1 stays row 1. Row 2 stays row 2, and then they might say row 3 plus negative 2 times row 1 replaces row 3. So they'll show in this equation that we were doing out to the side, but they won't show any of the work because they're just doing it in their head. But this is what's happened. This is notation that you might see. Hopefully you will see it, because a good teacher or professor will show you what they're doing as they go from matrix to matrix. I used to make my classes show this every time, because how am I supposed to know what numbers they're pulling out of their rear ends? So I'm always made them label. Okay, so we're doing good. So we've got a 1, a 0, and a 0. So column 1 is finished. Then I move to column 2, and what am I supposed to have in this one? I'm supposed to have a 0, 1, 0. So that's the order I'm going to try to make that happen. 0, 1, 0. So I need this number to be a 0. So just like we said a second ago, to make a 0, you're either adding or subtracting. So should I add it to row 2, or should I add it to row 3, or do I need to do something creative? Well, if you notice, I've got a 6 here and a negative 3 here. So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, what if I take my top row and double it? So 2 times this row, then add it to the third row, because if I do this number times 2, it's a -6, and -6 plus 6, that will make the 0 that I want. Then I'll just replace row 1 with that. So I could write out all my math over here to the side, but since we've already done that, I'm just going to talk through it for this one. So let's do this in our head. So 2 times this is 2, plus the third row, that's now a 2. 2 times this is -6, plus that is a 0. 2 times this is a 2, plus the third row, that's now a 1. And then 2 times this is 20. 20 plus this is a 5. Okay, so that is the math that needed to be done to turn this into a 0. Now for these 2 rows, I'm just going to recopy. I know what you're thinking. Some of you are in a panic mode because I just messed up the 1 that I had created back here. But guys, creating a 1 is a piece of cake. Don't panic about getting those 1s, okay? Because all I'd really have to do is, if you want to go ahead and turn that into a 1, just divide everything by 2. And, you know, you could have even done that in the same exact step. You could have done this math and then said, oh wait, I messed this up. So now that I have my 0, you could have divided by 2, divided by, you know, and you could totally do that. I'm actually not going to worry about the 1 part just yet. I think I'm going to worry about all the zeros, and then I'll go back and make people a 1 if I need to, because that'll be super easy. So that being said, right here, I know my next step is supposed to be to turn this into a 1, but if I do that, I'll be dividing by 5, dividing by 5, dividing by 5. These are going to become ugly fractions, so part of me just wants to skip down to where the next 0 needs to be. So in my next matrix, I'm going to worry about making this a 0. Okay, so how do we turn that into a 0? Well, there's a bunch of different ways. I think what I'm going to do is, I'll look at this 5 and this 6. Okay, so I think what I'll have to do is multiply. I'm just going to recopy my row 1 real quick. I think what I'll need to do is multiply row 2 by a 6, and then multiply row 3 by a -5. Because if I do that, that'll be a +30. And that'll be a -30, and then when I add them together, it will make a 0 here, okay? So I'm going to do that and replace row 3, so that's going to go down there. So here I'm just recopying. Row 1 stays row 1, and in fact I'll do row 2 stays row 2, and I'm going to do this math for row 3. So 6 times this is 0 plus, okay, so that stays a 0. Here's my +30 and -30. Here I'm doing 6 times that, so -6 plus +5. -6 plus +5 is a -1. I think I did that right. Let's double check my math. 6 times that is -6 plus a +5. Yeah. Okay, and then I need to do the same thing here. So I'm going to take 6 times row 2, so -13 times 6 plus -5 times -15. Gross. So this may be where you want to pull out a calculator. I know I am. Okay, so that is a -13 times 6, okay, equals a -78. And then that's going to be plus 5 times 15 is 75. So I'm getting a -3 right here. Okay, so now I'm doing good. I've got my zeros, Now down to your last column, which ones are supposed to be 0? Well, it's the top one and the bottom one are supposed to be a 0. So this is where it's going to get pretty easy actually. Look right here, to make a 0, what if I just add row 1 and row 2? And if I do that, I'm going to replace, which one do I want to replace? I'm going to replace row 1. I don't like that. Let's see what happens. Okay, so so add these together. So I'm going to get a 2, I'm going to get a 5, I'm going to get a 0, and I'm going to get a -8. Is that right? Yeah. And then if I want this one to be a 0, dang it, I don't like this. Hold on a sec. Okay, so I don't like this because I'm like totally messing up this row. So let me go back and just rethink. Okay, I need this to be a 0, but if I add it to this, I've created that junk that was there. So why don't I instead add row 1 plus row 3 and replace row 1? Because if I do that, I've got all these zeros and it'll actually be pretty friendly. So row 1 plus row 3 is a 2, a 0, a 0, and a 2. Yay, that looks really good. Now, in this row, I need this one to be a 0. So in this one, let me add row 2 also to row 3, but I think I need to multiply row 3 by a -1 because I need this to 0 out, right? And they're both negative right now, so and that's going to become row 2. So 0 plus 0 is 0, 5 plus 0 is 5, and then that times a -1 plus that is 0. This times a -1 is a +3, plus that is a -10, and then I'll just recopy row 3. Okay, cool. So that's the hard part, is making all those zeros happen. Now, all that we need is to work on this diagonal because it needs to be a 1. This is so quick and easy. So if you save it for the end, all that has to be done is to divide or multiply to turn a number into 1. And so, you know, how do you turn a 2 into a 1? Well, just divide by 2. So for row 1, I'm just going to divide by 2 and replace row 1. So 2 divided by 2 is 1, 0 over 2, 0 over 2, 2 over 2. What about row 2? What do I need to divide by? Well, if that's a 5, I need to divide by 5. So 0 over 5, 5 over 5, 0 over 5, -10 over 5. And the last one is row 3. It's already a 1, but it's a negative, so I need to divide by -1. So divide by -1, divide by -1, divide by -1, divide by -1. And I have created the identity matrix here, which is the goal, which means that these are my answers. X is 1, Y is -2, and Z is 3. I realized that one problem took me 18 minutes, but I had to talk through it super slow, giving you all the notes and showing all of my notation out to the side. I promise you'll get fast. After you do like 2 or 3, you'll start to speed up. But if there's a tricky one that you want to see me work, feel free to send it to me. Thanks.